Everybody, and welcome to day 9 of the VID21 conference. My name is Julia Still, the creator and host, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you all here today. We are crossing the Pacific Ocean to Southern California, where the wonderful Ryan Gottfredson is waiting in the wings. Ryan is a cutting-edge leadership expert. He's an author, a researcher, a consultant. He helps organizations elevate their leaders primarily through a focus on mindset. Ryan is the Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of Success Mindsets, the key to unlocking greater success in your life, work, and leadership. He's also a leadership professor at the College of Business and Economics at California State University-Fullerton. California is one of my favorite places in the world, Ryan. I'm very jealous that you're there and I am not. So I'm going to welcome you to the stage. Welcome to VID21 and hand over to you for let's dive into mindset.
So I want to start with a question, and I want you to put in the chat box, how much do you agree with the following statement on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being strongly agree? How much do you agree that part of your mission and purpose is to have a positive, uplifting influence on the people you work and associate with, the customers you serve, and or the organizations that you work for? So give me your response on a scale of 1 to 10. All right, no surprise that we're all 10 here, which is essentially what I was anticipating. And when I talk about leadership, to me, leadership is not about a position, although we can talk about it in that way. It's really about having a positive influence, hopefully directing others toward goal achievement. And we could do that whether or not we are in a formal leadership position or not. So the way that I'm thinking about this session, whether you are in a formal leadership position, whether or not you're there, I think you're going to get a lot out of today. And Luis, I love your key word being lift. One of my key words is elevate. So we've got some similarity there. So I want to talk to you about a perplexing phenomenon. So I do a lot of work working with organizations and developing their leaders. And oftentimes I recognize something that has been perplexing to me, and I'm going to give you kind of an answer to this perplexing phenomenon as we go along. But when I walk into a room of leaders, I'll frequently ask them the question, are you trying your best to be a great leader? Now, if you put yourself in my shoes, and you ask this question to a room full of leaders, what % of hands do you think would go up here? And I'm looking for you to put an answer in the chat box. So if you ask this group of leaders, are you trying the best you can to be a great leader? How many hands would go up? What %? All right, Julia, you're the pessimistic one here. Everybody's saying above 50%. Julia's saying below. Yeah, Sue says no one will want to admit that they aren't, right? Which is, I think, part of the point here. But essentially, all hands will go up. And I think that there's some social pressure, of course, to do that. But I want to recognize that I think that most leaders, if not all leaders, really want to have a positive influence. I have yet to meet a leader who says, I want to go to work and I want to have a negative influence. I just don't think that happens. So generally, the intention is to have a really positive influence. But let me direct you to the second part of this perplexing phenomenon. So what I've got here on the left side of the screen is 4 different percentages. And what I'm going to bring up 4 statements, and I want you to try to assign a percentage with each statement. We'll kind of see how you do. So feel free to chat these in the chat box if you don't want to, no big worries. So here's the first statement. What % of employees report that their direct leader damages their self-esteem? Now, I don't know about you, but seeing these percentages is already, I'm thinking, man, these percentages are way too high. Here's the second statement. What percent of employees don't trust their direct leader to tell the truth? Third, what percent of employees would prefer to have a different direct leader compared to more pay? And the last one here, what percent of employees say that their direct leader is the worst and most stressful part of their job? Julia's wanting to renege here. So again, I don't know about you, but already these percentages feel way too high. Well, here's the actual results. So 60% say that their direct leader damages their self-esteem. 82% say they don't trust their direct leader to tell the truth. 65% would rather have a new leader or boss compared to more pay. And 3 out of 4 say my direct leader is the worst and most stressful part of my job. So what's perplexing to me here is that leaders are saying that they are trying their best, yet look at these devastating effects that they are having on the people that they're leading. Right? What is going on here? Well, what I see is that leaders have really good intentions, but those intentions rarely play out in reality. So let me give you some specific examples here. So I think all leaders want their employees to learn, grow, and develop. But the common reality is that leaders often come down hard on their employees when their employees fail. And it's really hard to learn, grow, and develop if you're afraid as an employee to fail. Leaders want to create psychological safety, but leaders commonly shut down the ideas and suggestions of their employees. Leaders want to be on the cutting edge, but leaders also hate encountering problems. Leaders want organizations and teams to succeed, yet leaders commonly prioritize their own success over the group or the organization that they're leading. I don't know. What do you think? Would you agree or disagree? Give me an agree or disagree with this in the chat box. And if you disagree, that's fine, but it seems like we're all on the same page. Awesome, great. So really for me, the question has become, why is this? Why is it that our good intentions don't translate into the reality that we want? Well, I think to answer this question, we've got to recognize that there's 2 different forms of development. There's what I call horizontal development, and there is vertical development. Now, let me define each of these for you. So horizontal development is when we are adding more knowledge, skills, and competencies to what we already have. So the focus of horizontal development is on doing more. This is like adding an app onto the iPad. Well, what happens when we add an app onto the iPad, now the iPad can do more. It can function more broadly than what it could before. Let me give you a classic example of horizontal development in organizations and even leadership development. One of the #1 focused on topics in leadership development programs is delivering effective feedback. Now, that's not bad. Of course, we probably want our leaders and managers to deliver effective feedback, but the idea is generally, okay, if we're going to send our leaders to a training on delivering effective feedback, kind of what we're thinking already to begin with is let's just download this delivering effective feedback app onto our leaders and managers. And then we kind of assume that once that app is downloaded, they're going to go about providing effective feedback. But I don't know about you, but it doesn't always translate that way, is what my observation is, right? So there's another form of development that really isn't focused on. So I would say that 95% of all leadership development in organizations is horizontal development. Vertical development is very different. It isn't adding new knowledge, skills, and capabilities. It is elevating a person's ability to make meaning of their world in more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated ways. So the focus here isn't on doing more, it's on becoming better. So we're not adding an app onto the iPad. What we're doing is we're upgrading that iPad's operating system altogether. So when this is important because our ability to take on an app like delivering effective feedback is based upon the underlying operating system. How sophisticated is it, right? So For example, I've got a 6-year-old iPad that's downstairs. I can no longer download apps from the App Store onto the iPad because the underlying operating system is not compatible with the new apps. So we largely overlook vertical development. Now, as I describe this to you, I'm interested in your thoughts. And so I've got a few questions that I want to get your responses in the chat box. What would you say is easier, horizontal or vertical? And you could just put H or V in the chat box. All right, so we've got most of us saying H, which is what I would agree with. Which is more commonly focused on? Would you agree with what I said previously, that it's horizontal? Yep, seems like we're on the same page here. Which is needed more, would you say? Horizontal or vertical? Sue, we've got, I've been trying to count all the V's you put in there. Good. So I think you're right. And let me explain one perspective of why I think vertical is needed now more than ever. Now, I'm not saying horizontal is bad. It surely has its time and its place. But I think we do need to emphasize vertical more. Now, this only becomes obvious when we look at the altitude of our vertical development relative to something else, relative to the complexity of the situation that we're facing. You see, if our altitude of vertical development exceeds the complexity of our situation, then we will be able to navigate that situation quite effectively. Now, I'm just going to propose that for many of us, pre-COVID-19, this was what was going on, right? The complexity of our world, yeah, it was, depending on our situation, could be, moderately to high complex. And we may have had an altitude of vertical development that exceeded that. But for many of us, what we saw as we went into the COVID pandemic is the complexity of our world skyrocketed. And we're left to ask ourselves the question, has our altitude of vertical development kept up with the rising complexity? So I don't know about you, but one of the things that I've seen with the consulting work that I do is I am busier now than ever before because organizations came to the stark reality that many, if not most of their leaders' altitude of vertical development was not suited for the rising complexity that they faced. And so now they're scrambling to try to increase the altitude of their leaders' vertical development. And of course, they're not saying it in that language, but that's what they're feeling. So our level of vertical development does affect our ability to navigate complex situations. So this is why I think now more than ever, a focus on vertical development is needed. Does this make sense to you? Give me a yes or no in the chat box. And if you have any questions as I go along, don't hesitate to chat those in or even pull yourself off mute and comment up. All right. So then we can ask ourselves the question, and going back to really what we started with, what is better to focus on to become more of the positive influence that we want to be? Because this is important to all of us. We all said 10, right? And I'm going to propose, not that horizontal can't help us, but what is most important is vertical development. You see, when we look at this as a three-dimensional figure, we can, in theory, gauge how much knowledge we have, how much skills we have, and how much of this mental development or sophistication we have. And for me, it's helpful to map on the have, do, be model here. And so when we focus on vertical development, we do focus on our being in a way that we rarely are able to do so. So I want to further dive into this topic. And to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you three slides. And as I show you these 3 slides, they're going to be just a whole bunch of words or statements on these slides. And I want you to think which most accurately reflects the leaders or managers that you have had in your career. Okay, so I'm going to go through the 3 slides once. at kind of a slower pace, and then I'll go through them again at a little bit of a faster pace. And afterwards, I'm going to ask you which one most accurately reflects the leaders or managers you've had in your career. And they're going to be labeled A, B, and C. Okay. So here's slide A. I'll just give you a minute to kind of look these over. All right, here is slide B. And here is slide C. All right, let me go through them just once again, a little bit quicker. So we got slide A. We got slide B. We've got slide C. All right, so what do you think? Which one most accurately reflects the leaders and managers you've had in your career? Joe says currently C, great, otherwise a mix of B's and A's. Right, Josie and Heidi agree. Vanessa's had a mix of them all. Good. Julia says A and B. I did this actually a couple weeks ago, and there was a gentleman who was on, and I happen to know him personally, and he's actually retired. And he said, he went back after I presented this. He said, I had 30 different direct leaders during my career. And there were only 2 that operated out of this slide C. So I think that that's probably pretty reflective of most people. So what these slides were representing were actually different mind levels in terms of our vertical development. So there's been a lot of the concepts around vertical development have been around for more than 50 years. And they're largely talked about in developmental psychology. And and there's different thought leaders here. So people like Bob Keegan, Bill Torbert, Suzanne Cook-Greuter. One person who's a bigger name in the space right now is Nick Petrie. So most of these people have all identified their own hierarchy of mind levels. Some have 3, some have 5, some have 7, sometimes there's even more. Now, all of these, while there may be different levels, all of these thought leaders would agree that there are 3 basic mind levels, and you can split them up and become a little bit more specific. But I label these Mind 1.0, Mind 2.0, and Mind 3.0, because what to me these represents is our underlying operating system. And research on these different mind levels have found that 64% of all adults operate primarily in Mind 1.0, 35% operate primarily in 2.0, and 1% operates in Mind 3.0. Now, these percentages change quite drastically when we look at executives. So we got 7% at Mind 1.0, nearly all of them, 85% at Mind 2.0, and then 8% at Mind 3.0. So let me go into each of these different mind levels and just kind of describe them at a high level. So when we look at Mind 1.0, I call this self-preservation mode. When people are in Mind 1.0, their operating system is attuned to really 3 things. Primarily their safety, their comfort, and belonging. And when these are our focus, we are on near consistent lookout to threats to our image, our ego, and our identity. Also, because we are so focused on safety, security, comfort, and belonging, we have a tendency to just want to fit in, right? And in doing so, we become dependent thinkers, faithful followers, and rather reliant upon authority. Now, common feelings that those in Mind 1.0 have, not that they have these all the time, but common feelings that they'll have is overwhelm, powerlessness, low energy, envious, angry, defensive, and controlling. So Sue's saying fear-based. Yes, and particularly, again, around safety, comfort, and belonging. So they're afraid almost of standing out, right? They want to fit in. So good. So that's mind 1.0. Mind 2.0 is self-focused reward mode. So we're not focused on fitting in. We're actually focused on standing out. We're fearful of being part of the majority. We're focused on our pleasures, gain, praise, priority, or popularity, power, privilege, and success. And Sue's saying around Maslow's hierarchy. Yes, so some of these ideas are tied into Maslow's hierarchy here. Now, the thing that separates mind 1 from mind 1.0 from mind 2.0 is mind 2.0, they aren't dependent thinkers, they are independent thinkers. They're self-directed, but they're generally focused on shorter term selfish gains. So common feelings that they will have is competitive, egotistical, rigid, impatient, anxious, argumentative, and judgmental. Because these are all aspects of standing out. Well, mind 3.0, this is what I call contribution mode. We're not focused on our protection or our safety or our belonging, and we're not focused on our own advancement. We are focused on adding value to others. And so you make a great point. These are all showing up for me, and you're getting just a step ahead of me, but I love where your mind's at. So when we are in mind 3.0, we operate as a wise sage. We are centered, we are balanced, we are an interdependent thinker, not dependent or independent thinkers. We can see and hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, and we don't rush to any certain judgment or decision. We are more willing to explore. So some common feelings here is that we are centered, resilient, hopeful, compassionate, curious, present, content, and agile. And even as we go through these, we can ask ourselves, who's going to do a better job of navigating a complex situation? Well, of course, those here in mind 3.0. So I want to just make an important distinction here, isn't that? And that's shown via this dotted line across the top. You see, when we operate at a level below that dotted line, we are being self-focused. We either want our comfort or our safety, or we want to get ahead. We want to win. We want to stand out. This is about us. It's when we get above that dotted line that we're focused on people on the outside of us, or purposes that are larger, that are bigger than us. We're focused on adding value. Now, what we know is that really, depending upon the level that we are operating at, our internal operating system, this programs us to see the world differently, right? So oftentimes, if you were to get a mind 1.0 person in the room with a mind 2.0 person, they wouldn't understand each other, right? Because mind 1.0 is saying, why would you ever want to stand out? And 2.0 is saying, why would you ever want to fit in? Right? So they end up keeping score differently. They take on different values, and this could come to play. So we'll take an example like constructive criticism. If we receive constructive criticism and we're in mind 1.0, we're going to get defensive. We're going to tune it out because it's a way of protecting our belongingness. But those in mind 2.0, well, they're probably going to say it depends on the person delivering it and how it's delivered. Is this going to help me get ahead, or is this going to hinder me? Right? But then those in mind 3.0 is regardless who gave it and how it's delivered, I love it because it is an opportunity to learn and grow. And we can look at change in a very similar way. Those in mind 1.0, they want to resist change because change is a disruption to them. Mind 2.0 is I'll embrace it if it's easy or if it'll help me get ahead. Whereas mind 3.0 is saying, change is a constant, and I need to embrace it regardless of how difficult it is, right? And they develop different strategic focus. So those in mind 1.0, if I'm a mind 1.0 leader, my focus is going to be on not failing. If I'm in mind 2.0, it's going to be on, I've got to achieve the outcomes. I've got to hit my metrics. But mind 3.0 is, well, metrics and outcomes are important, not failing. That's kind of important. But what's really important is creating a culture that will allow for long-term success and long-term hitting of the metrics and the goals that we have. And again, here's the percentages around all adults And here's the percentages of executives. So I want to go back to what Sue had mentioned is you probably recognize that all of these show up to you to a certain degree. That's surely how I feel. There's some times where I feel like I'm in mind 1.0, times I'm in 2.0, and times I'm in 3.0. And so the real question, I think, is what is our center of gravity? What percentage of the time are we spending in each level? Now, those who are on the lower end of vertical development are going to spend the majority of their time in Mind 1.0. For a moderate level of vertical development, we'll spend the majority of time in Mind 2.0. And if we have a high level of vertical development, we'll spend the majority of our time in Mind 3.0. So to me, this helps me understand why is it that leaders' good intentions don't rarely play out in reality. Why is it that leaders come down hard on employees when they fail? Why do they shut them out? Why do they get upset over the problems? Why do they prioritize their own success? Well, it's probably because they are operating in either Mind 1.0 or Mind 2.0. Really, the only way we are going to be, create a safe space, learn from failure, allow for problems to occur as a way to progress further and prioritize the success of others is if we are operating in Mind 3.0. So I'm curious, what is standing out to you here? What insights are you having? And maybe let me have you put down your main takeaway in the chat box so far. If a light bulb has gone off, where has it been? So Julie's saying more focus on being than doing. I think there's a lot of talk that says we are focused on being. I think if we look deeply in it, it's rare to find a true focus on being. In fact, when I present this information, one of the first questions leaders will ask is, well, what can we do about this, right? And that's we do need to take action, but it's our minds very quickly go to kind of that horizontal level. All right, let me see what else here. Yeah, so Josie's saying people behave based upon their value set. And what I would also suggest on top of that is that our value set is contingent upon the underlying operating system. Great. All right. So this leads hopefully to the question, okay, how do we elevate our vertical altitude and how do we spend more time in Mind 3.0? Well, in order to answer this question, we've got to go back to our definition of vertical development, which is we've got to explore our meaning making, or in other words, our meaning makers. Well, what is it about us that makes meaning? What causes two different people to see the exact same thing, but interpret it differently? Well, that is our mindsets. Our mindsets are the mental lenses that we wear that shape how we view the world around us. In fact, research has found that 90% of our thinking, feeling, judging, and acting is driven by our non-conscious automatic processing. Well, what drives our non-conscious automatic processing? It's our mindset. So we're all wearing mental lenses, but most people are actually not aware of what lenses they happen to be wearing. And in fact, our mindsets, this is just the idea, is our mindsets truly are, and we can point at this from both a psychological and a neuroscience perspective, our mindsets are the most foundational aspect about ourselves. Our mindsets drive how we think drives how we behave drives our success. And again, our mindsets largely reside, for most people, below the level of our consciousness, but they are something that we can become more conscious of. And that's something that I'll be talking about as we go along. So Joe asked a great question. Does the mindset get impacted by people around you and their reaction to challenges? Yes. And I want to answer that more fully as we go along. But the reality is, and maybe let me just touch on it now, the mindsets we currently have is brought about by two broad reasons or factors. One is our prior life's experience, the things that we have been through, right? So one of the things that I found and done quite a bit of research on is that when people go through trauma, and that could be a big T trauma or little t trauma, that affects our mindsets. In fact, when we go through trauma, we go into self-protection mode, which makes us take on more negative mindsets. And this will become more clear as we go along. The second factor that drives our mindsets is our current culture in which we're operating in, right? If we don't feel safe in that current culture, again, we're going to want to self-protect. So let me demonstrate the power of mindsets and how they operate largely at this non-conscious level. So there's this really interesting study where the researchers had individuals take a mindset assessment. They identified those that scored low and put them in group 1, those that scored high and put them in group 2. And then they gave them all the same task, which was 8 easy questions and then 4 difficult questions. What they were doing is they were setting them up for failure. And they were going to see if they would respond differently to failure. Well, sure enough, that's what they found. So those in group 1, those that scored low, when they went through the 8 easy questions, they were rather pleased with themselves. But as soon as they hit those hard questions, they became depressed. Their thoughts quickly denigrated and they stopped applying themselves. They gave up. Those in group 2, when they hit the hard questions, they actually started to encourage themselves. They said things like, oh man, I was hoping this would be a challenge. They dug in more vigorously and they remained confident and optimistic. Now, the thing that's interesting about this to me is, well, one, they're operating so differently, but 2, I think if we ask them, both groups, did you handle the situation in the best way that you knew how? I think they both would have said yes. How could I have handled it differently? Is what they would have asked. And of course, they're both saying the same thing, but it's only one group who's operating at a much more effective level. And this only becomes obvious when we take this third-party perspective. So this is the power of mindsets. And again, we're largely not conscious to our mindsets, but we can become conscious when we start to ask the question, what mindsets do we need to have if we want to be successful? What mindsets are going to be the best for our internal operating system? And so what I've done is I've scoured the academic literature on mindsets. And what I found is that there's 4 sets of mindsets that have been studied for 30 plus years, all demonstrating that these mindsets do dictate how we think, how we learn, and how we behave. And they do exist on a continuum such that those on the negative side end up having negative effects. Not to say that there isn't any good that can come from them, but when we compare the positive mindset, the outcomes associated with the positive mindsets to the outcomes associated with the negative mindsets, the outcomes with the positive mindsets always far exceed the outcomes associated with the negative mindsets. So there is a continuum, and each of us, our mindsets reside somewhere along each of these continuums. So one of the things that's interesting to me about this is that these mindsets exist around different tensions. So it's almost impossible to kind of have both simultaneously. Let me show you what I mean here. So when we have a fixed mindset, we don't believe that we could change our talents, abilities, and intelligence. And when we don't believe that we could change, we want to avoid failure, because failure to us would mean that we are a failure, that we are a have-not, and we can't become a have. So those are the fixed mindsets are primarily focused on avoiding failure and protecting their image. They want to look good. Those with the growth mindset, they don't care about failing, they care about learning and growing. And in fact, they recognize that if they fail, this may be the best opportunity to learn and grow. If they fail, that may mean that they're a have-not now, but doesn't preclude them becoming a have in the future. So we can't love learning and growing and avoid failure at the same time. So we kind of lean more towards one side as opposed to the other. The same thing goes for the rest of these. So with a closed mindset, our focus is on being right. We think that what we know is best and we want to be right or be seen as right. But to have an open mindset where we're wanting to find truth and think optimally, we've got to believe at some level that we might be wrong. Right? We can't simultaneously think that we're right and that we might be wrong. We're going to lean more towards one side as opposed to the other. Similar with prevention and promotion. When we have a prevention mindset, we're focused on avoiding problems. When we have a promotion mindset, we're focused on reaching goals. Again, we can't focus on reaching goals and also anticipate that we're going to be able to avoid problems, because in the process of reaching goals, undoubtedly, we're going to experience problems. And with inward and outward, when we have an inward mindset, we're focusing on us getting ahead. When we have an outward mindset, we're focused on lifting others. So one of the things that came up in some of your comments earlier is maybe we need a mindset recharge after the COVID, as we're hopefully coming out of this COVID pandemic. The reality is that the COVID pandemic, because it has enhanced the complexity of our world, we have felt overwhelmed, which causes us to want to self-protect. We naturally are going to kind of be pulled into these more negative mindsets, right? And so what we want to do as we're coming out of this is we want to be more intentional about developing and strengthening these positive mindsets. The reality is we've got a neural connection in our mind for a fixed mindset. We've also got one for a growth mindset. The one that we come to rely upon most is the one that is stronger because it fires more rapidly and it fires more readily. Well, as we know, our brain is plastic. And so what we need to do is, if we want to shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, we've got to exercise and strengthen that growth mindset neural connection. The more that we do that, the more that we'll come to rely upon that neural connection kind of naturally. Is this making sense? Any questions popping up for you here? I feel like I've just spouted off a whole bunch of information. I'm just going to carry on. If you do have questions, that's fine. Just put them in the chat box. We haven't left this conversation. So when we look at these, we can first ask ourselves, who's going to be more effective? Who is more programmed for success? Somebody with fixed, closed, prevention, and inward, or somebody with growth, open, promotion, outward? Well, that seems pretty clear, right? And in fact, I think we can map on the vertical development framework. The people who are dominantly fixed, closed, prevention, inward, they're in this self-protection mode, right? They're mind 1.0. Those who are growth, open, promotion, and outward, they're in this centered place, right? They're not going to overreact at failing. They're going to use it as an opportunity to learn and grow. They're not holding on tightly to the idea that they need to be right. Thus, they're more open to the ideas of others. They're centered, right? So, and then those that are in mind 2.0 are usually kind of either middle ground or a combination of some stronger negative and some stronger positive. But if we can improve our mindsets, what we're actually doing is we shift from the mindsets on the left to the mindsets on the right. We are actually seeing our world or making meaning of our world in more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated ways. Here's one of the ways that I like presenting this. So I've got 4 desires that I'm going to show you. You put in the chat box whether or not society says these are good or bad desires, okay? So here's the desires. A desire to look good, be right, avoid problems, and get ahead. Does society say that these are good or bad desires? Good, right? So one of the things in asking this question, I'm forcing you to take polar opposites while also encouraging you to be in mind 3.0, which is not somebody, when we're there, we don't want to rush to these polar ends, which is good. All great comments there in the chat box. So when I think that society essentially says that they're good desires, at least on the surface, right? Because who wants to look bad, be wrong, have problems, and get passed up? Nobody, right? Especially leaders. But when we have these desires, these are desires that are actually fueled by the negative mindsets. Now, why are these desires bad? Well, where is our focus if these are our desires? It's on ourselves. This is when we're in self-protection mode. So good, Vanessa. And I think, and to be quite honest with you, for most of my adult life, this is where I've been. And I think I was here not so much because I had some major trauma in my background, but largely because I didn't know that there were better desires to have, right? Which there are. The positive mindsets, the desires that flow out of those are a desire to learn and grow, find truth, reach goals, and lift others. And when we are here, we aren't in self-protection mode, we're in organization advance mode. So again, if we go back to these good intentions, but the common reality, I think this is shedding light on what's going on here. Is the leaders, again, don't maybe have the vertical development necessary, or stated slightly differently, is they don't have the mindsets that allow them to operate along the lines of their good intentions. They've got fears that are getting in their way because they're fearful of failure. They're fearful of being wrong. They're fearful of having problems. They're fearful of missing out, right? These are all things that are fueled by a fix, close, prevention, and inward mindsets. So what can we do to elevate? And I want to answer this, but Sue asked a question. How do we help surface that in a way that doesn't make them feel threatened? Great question. So I've got two initial answers, and we could hopefully dive into it a little bit more. So one initial answer is just by helping people see, learn about these different development levels, these Mind 1.0, Mind 2.0, Mind 3.0, I think allows them to just awaken, right? If we don't know these things, it's hard to focus on them. So the first step in this vertical development journey and mindset shift journey is always an awakening. We're helping them awaken to these different vertical levels, to these different mindsets. Once we put labels on them, people almost naturally become empowered to focus on them. And then the second answer is I've got a mindset assessment that can help. And I'm going to invite you to take that. It's on my website at ryangottfredson.com. I'll show that to you here in a little bit. But it provides objective information. So I've had about 15,000 people take my mindset assessment. And what the assessment does is it compares your results relative to the 15,000 other people who have taken it. It shows you where do you stack up along each of these continuums. So it's rather objective information that helps people awaken. Because I don't know about you, is sometimes the people with the most negative mindsets, they're the ones who think that they have really positive mindsets. And so the assessment can really help them awaken to where they're currently at. So there's this awesome quote here that I love. Is that the development of leadership effectiveness must at a minimum keep pace with the rate of change and the rate of escalating complexity, right? We're seeing that now more than ever with the COVID pandemic. So how do we enhance our cognitive and emotional sophistication? Well, I think broadly, we need to explore our meaning making. We need to push against our current worldviews and assumptions. I'm not saying that we let go of those yet. Let's just explore them. Let's play scientist and see, is this an assumption or a perspective that is helping me, or is it hurting me? Or in what ways is it helping me? And what ways is it hurting me? We need to investigate our self-protective desires and where they come from, right? What are our primary fears? And then what are the associative desires with those fears? And then we need to awaken to our mindsets and implement practices that allow us to exercise and strengthen our positive mindset neural connections. So those are some global suggestions. Let's get a little bit more specific. So one is you can take my mindset assessment. So you could go to my website, or if you've got your phone, you could just snap the QR code. It'll take you there. If you take the assessment on your phone, you may want to put your phone horizontally. It'll just flow a little bit easier. It's only 20 questions, so it'll take you 5 to 7 minutes to complete. So that's, I think, a great first step. Of course, I would recommend getting a coach or a consultant that can help with pushing against worldviews and current mindsets. I think that pushing against our worldviews and current mindsets is difficult to do on our own, not impossible, but it's difficult. For me, one of the things that I found to be the most helpful in pushing against my worldviews and current mindsets is to read, to engage in deep learning. In fact, there's a gentleman, his name is Bob Quinn or Robert Quinn, and he may be one of the world's best experts on organizational and personal change. And he says that people and organizations change for 2 reasons, or one of 2 reasons, sometimes a combination of both. But one is going through a crisis, and 2 is deep learning. Only one of those 2 is something we have control over. So I think deep learning is something we could be intentional about. And here's a host of books that I would recommend. Of course, I'm biased towards the first one, as that's something that I wrote. And if we want to focus on a growth mindset, Carol Dweck's book is fantastic. Of course, I talk about all the mindsets in my book. If we want to cover an open mindset, Think Again by Adam Grant and Principles by Ray Dalio, I think are really good. If we want more of a promotion mindsets, I think Creativity Inc. is a great one. Another one's coming to the top of my mind is The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zander. And if we want to focus on an outward mindset, these are a couple of really great books: Leadership and Self-Deception and Bonds That Make Us Free. Sue, I'm there with you. I just finished reading Adam's book, Adam Grant's book, and I had to throw it on the slide. I didn't have it there a few weeks ago. So great. We can use frameworks in this presentation to have discussions. Let's learn more about horizontal versus vertical development, these mind levels, and then these different mindsets. Let's have discussions around these on more of a regular basis. And then we could also potentially compile a collective mindset report. So what I do with organizations that I work with is I'll have them take my mindset assessment, and then I aggregate those results up to the collective level. Let me show you just really quickly what this looks like. So here's an organization I worked with. We looked at fixed and growth mindsets, and they have 70% of the leaders here have more of a fixed mindset. Only 7% have a strong growth mindset. When we look at closed open, they were leaning more towards the open mindset side, but still pretty mixed. Prevention and promotion, there seems to be some polarization here, but also about half and half. And then when we look at inward to outward, is there quite an outward mindset? Now, these results, as I've done this with well over 100 different groups, what these results tell me is it's not a very agile group, but it is one that is family friendly. Like it's kind of got this family feel to it, but we're kind of get stuck in the old way of doing things. And the culture in this culture is fear around changing things up, because we may be worried that we might ruin that family feel. We might be different than what we have been in the past. And we're a little bit nervous about that. Tamara asked a question around these mindset results and age. And if you were to go to my website, in fact, I could probably look it up really quick. I did look at this recently, and I'll post it in the chat box. Give me just a minute. But essentially what I found is that there's zero correlation between mindset and age for the first 3 sets of mindsets. Now, for inward to outward, there is a correlation that as we grow older, we grow more outward. So I just put in the chat box where you can find all of the results associated with my research there. So great question. All right, so the moral of the story here is if we want to become more positive influence on the world around us, it's going to be important that we vertically develop. We become more cognitively and emotionally sophisticated. So we need to think about this in terms of just elevating in general, as well as what percentage of the time are we spending in Mind 1.0, Mind 2.0, and Mind 3.0. In fact, as I'm thinking about this, one of the tools that has really helped me are things like a gratitude journal. So I use the 5-minute journal. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's something I've been doing for 3 years, and it has been a game changer for exercising my positive mindsets on a daily basis. So I credit that journal to being part of my shift from having the negative mindsets to now where I feel like I'm generally, if not all the time, on more of the positive side of the continuum. All right, so, and of course, I think that this is more relevant now than ever because of the complexity of our world. And I don't know about you, but I'm not so sure that our world is going to become any less complex moving forward. So what that means for me is I feel like I need to enhance the altitude of my vertical development, which I feel like I'm trying to be really intentional about. All right, so, that's what I had. What I would love for you to do, if you're willing, is to chat in your biggest takeaway thus far from this session. And if we've got a few minutes, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. So for me, my goal for this session was largely that awareness component. Let's introduce you to the concepts of vertical development, the different mind levels, and then give you a sense of what we need to focus on to vertically develop, which is our mindsets. Now, I tried at the end, of course, to give you some practical suggestions. Of course, we could have spent a lot of more time there, but I do believe that the first step in this journey is that awareness component. So that's what I tried to emphasize here. Good. Some good takeaways here. One of the things that I'm going to try to do, Julia recommended, is she's got a swag bag and put together. I'm going to throw in there a white paper that I've done on vertical development if you want to dive into it further. Also, a link to my mindset assessment or hopefully things that I'll be able to put in there. All right, so I'm glad you are enjoying this session. I'm gonna just, if you need any of my contact information or wanna connect on social media channels, would be more than happy to do so. But that's essentially it for me. So I don't know, Julia, if you want to say anything before we close out.